The Sacred Reawakening, Embracing Ancestral Roots. At the young age of 28, Anyamin found herself trapped in the tempest, unleashed by the encroaching waves of new religious fervors in a land hitherto steeped in tradition. This wasn't just any storm. It was a cataclysm of faiths, a clash of spiritual titans that shook the very foundations of our existence. Born-again churches, or Pentecostals as they were called, descended upon our land like voracious hunting eagles, ushering forth an era of tumultuous spiritual strife that continues to hold us in its grip to this day. Like a dagger slicing through the ligaments of our traditional spirituality, Pentecostalism severed one of the vital threads keeping the fabric of our identity intact, leaving us adrift in a world where the echoes of our ancestors, once as palpable as the whispering wind, grew faint and distant. Pentecostalism put a chasm between us and the familiar voices of the guardian spirits that had kept us in focus for generations. Yes, the falconer lost the falcon and things fell apart. The siren calls of church altars beckoned, drawing our people away from the sanctity of their ancestral bonds, leaving nature to reclaim the once hallowed shrines of our spiritual essence. No longer revered as bastions of solace, the relics of ancestral veneration became the vestiges of a bygone era, their silent guardianship overshadowed by the discord sown among families and communities. Our sacred traditions, once the cornerstone of our collective identity, faded into obscurity beneath the thunderous proclamations of zealous pastors. In their fiery sermons, they branded our ancestral altars as demonic strongholds to be cast aside. With unwavering determination, pastor after pastor, evangelist after evangelist, whether native to our land or visitors from afar, articulated their mission to obliterate every vestige of our indigenous spiritual heritage. Despite being descendants of our own soil, they willingly estranged themselves from their ancestral roots in a zealous quest to eradicate them. They assumed the role of modern-day Israelites, while casting us as their Canaanite adversaries to be vanquished. Echoing words from the ancient scriptures, one preacher waged spiritual warfare against our sacred symbols, admonishing his converts. Beware of forging alliances with the dwellers of this land you enter, lest they ensnare you. Instead, demolish their altars, shatter their sacred stones, and fell their Asherah poles. Unlike Roman Catholicism, which had forged some semblance of cultural and spiritual harmony with our traditions, Pentecostalism arrived with an uncompromising mandate, a literal interpretation of the Bible, poised to eradicate every vestige of our spiritual legacy. There was to be no room for negotiation, no accommodation for syncretism or enculturation, and certainly no embrace of ecumenism. It was an unequivocal usurpation, a complete subjugation of our spiritual landscape. Shockingly, it was our own kin who had embraced this foreign faith, fervently leading the charge against our spiritual heritage. They positioned themselves as architects of the schism, vowing to rend our community asunder, for they believed, in their fervor, that Jesus came not to reconcile, but to divide. In this turbulence of shifting allegiances, the very essence of what it meant to be African, to be a Nwe person, seemed to unravel before our eyes, like a rug unthreaded by unseen hands. The sacred rhythms of our days, once harmonized with the heartbeat of our ancestors, now faltered in the face of this relentless onslaught. Caught in the whirlwind of this spiritual upheaval, Anyamin found herself adrift in a sea of conflicting identities, her youthful spirit pounded by the relentless forces of change. It was a time when the age-old connection between tradition and modernity frayed at the edges, leaving young Nwe persons like Anyamin lost in the echoing silence of the world they were leaving behind and the identity shifts they were embracing. As the once familiar call of the falconer faded into the distance, Anyamin's center began to crumble, her sense of self slipping through her fingers like grains of sand. Amidst the chaos, Anyamin struggled to find her bearings. Her journey through the storm of conflicting loyalties felt like a bird tossed about in a tempest. Torn between the traditions of her ancestors and the enticing allure of newfound faiths, she stood at the crossroads of identity, her path obscured by the swirling fog of doubt and confusion. With each passing moment, the once clear road ahead grew increasingly uncertain, leaving Anyamin grasping for stability in a world turned upside down. In this turbulent sea of change, the siren song of Pentecostalism beckoned to the younger generation, offering a sanctuary of impartiality in a land rife with nepotism and favoritism. In a country where success seemed to hinge not on merit but on connections, the Pentecostal altars promised a level playing field under God's watchful gaze. Yet, this newfound solace came at a steep price. Converts were not only asked to forsake their ancestral ties, but in some cases, were demanded to cut down and cast their sacred monuments into the flames of oblivion, severing the ties that bound them to their past in exchange for a future shrouded in uncertainty. As the grip of Pentecostal Christianity took hold of Anyamin's heart, she found herself embroiled in a tumultuous inner conflict. The cherished memories of her beloved grandmother clashed violently with the teachings of her newfound faith that branded the woman who had once been her source of love and comfort as a dark agent of the devil. It was a painful unraveling of the tightly woven fabric of her childhood, a bittersweet act of letting go. The image of her grandmother, once a beacon of warmth and care, morphed into something sinister and tainted by the doctrines she now fervently embraced. Anyamin grappled with the weight of this internal turmoil, haunted by the dichotomy of her grandmother's nurturing presence and the sinister allegations imposed upon her by the fervent teachings of her newfound faith. She remembered the woman who had showered her with affection and treats, who had cradled her with love and fed her from her own dry breasts when her mother passed away. The dichotomy of these memories, now tainted by the dogma of her new faith, left her in an emotional quagmire. The role her grandmother had carved for her as her successor and the familial bridge between the living and the departed became a conflicting burden for Anyamin. She had been groomed to embody her grandmother's spiritual legacy, to serve as the family priestess and guardian of ancestral traditions. The weight of these expectations, now at odds with the teachings of her newfound faith, pressed heavily upon her soul. Everyone in the family called her Ondi or Grandma in recognition of her physical status as the embodiment of their grandmother. She loved it then, but now it carried a heavy burden of conflicting emotions and religious condemnation. Anyamin's heart ached as she grappled with the betrayal of her own memories and the rejection of her familial heritage. She felt the pangs of guilt and sorrow as she renounced the rituals and traditions that had defined her relationship with her grandmother, as she shunned the pouring of libations and distanced herself from the spiritual mantle she was expected to carry. In the tumult of conflicting emotions, Anyamin yearned for the simplicity of her childhood, where her grandmother had been a source of unwavering love and guidance. The painful transformation of her once beloved grandmother into a figure of condemnation and spiritual betrayal weighed heavily on her, casting a shadow over the memories she held dear. She felt torn between the teachings of her new faith and the irreplaceable bond she had shared with her grandmother, struggling to reconcile the two disparate worlds that now waged war within her heart. The fear of hellfire had won out, and she walked out on her grandmother and all that she represented. Anyamin was not alone in this predicament. In the wake of this spiritual upheaval, traditional practitioners found themselves adrift in a sea of shifting allegiances. The great medicine men, whose herbal lore had served the people in times of ill health, found their hands bound by the chains of change. Some, desperate to survive in this new landscape, became pastors, morphing into healers in the guise of priests. But they stopped using herbs and devised other methods like anointing oil, anointing water, holy scarves, and all sorts of paraphernalia. Their congregants bought them with enthusiasm as long as the objects were sanctified in the name of Jesus. So, the use of protective amulets took a new form, but it was just the same old wines in new wineskins. Others, once revered as seers and prophets, now saw into the past and future through the lens of Jesus, their visions no longer whispered by the ancestors' throw cowries, but filtered through the pages of the Bible. It was an era of transformation, where identities shattered like fragile clay beneath the weight of a relentless tide. And yet, amidst the chaos, a few stalwart souls remained, guardians of a fading flame, like beacons in the gathering darkness, preserving the legacy of our forebears against the tide of change. And so, amidst this cultural frenzy, stood the venerable Nkemdem, the steadfast guardian of the fabled shrine of Fuondem. His weathered frame and piercing gaze spoke of a lifetime spent in communion with the spirits of the land. While others bowed to the fear of hellfire, Nkemdem remained resolute, his dedication to tradition unwavering as the ancient stones beneath his feet. Despite his age, Nkemdem still regularly went to the shrine of Fuondem under the great waterfall to commune with his ancestors and the guardians of the land. One fateful day, as Nkemdem made his pilgrimage to the shrine, he encountered Anyamin sitting despondently by the roadside. Her tear-stained face glistened under the evening sun, a lost soul adrift in the currents of uncertainty. "What could possibly cause such distress for a young lady like you?" the old man inquired with genuine concern. At last, it seemed there was someone to listen to her troubles, Anyamin thought. The young woman poured out her heart to the elderly caretaker. It has been 5 years now since I graduated from the university. I have done everything in my powers to find a job to no avail, the distressed Anyamin recounted to the old man. Too bad! Too bad! What has become of this country? The old man exclaimed. Finally, my pastor told me the source of my problems, she added. Good then! But what stops you from confronting the problem? Anyamin looked at the old man, bewilderment all visible in her face. Then she said, The pastor said I am under an ancestral curse. Okay, now this is becoming interesting, the old man said almost pensively. There was desperation in her voice as she narrated her story further. But my father would not let me bring the pastor to destroy the accursed altars in our compound. The pastor was in our compound today to convince my father, and he almost chopped off his head with a machete. Oh really? Exclaimed the older Jabmur. A momentary smile coursed through his face. He was proud that the land still had some people who would rather go to that fictional hell than erase their heritage. The whole family is in stagnation, and my father doesn't appear worried. The man of God has promised that we shall experience breakthroughs like never before only if we destroy the demonic altars that our ancestors built in the past. Anyamin continued to pour out her heart. The wise old man gathered himself together and said consolingly to Anyamin, I've heard you, my child. I understand your problem. Rise up and come with me. Anyamin was uncertain if she should go along with the old man or not. Even though she knew Enkemdem, the fact that he was a priest of a pagan deity made her suspicious. Still, reluctantly, she stood up and followed him. As they walked down the hill, Enkemdem went silent as the breeze rustled in the coffee trees, alerting him to the whispers of the earth. He became alert and attuned his senses to the language of the wind, the song of the nearby river, and the dance of the smoke rising from a distant farm fire. To him, these were not mere natural elements. They were the voices of the departed, speaking from the realm beyond to the living here on earth. After a long silence that appeared to Anyamin as if several hours had passed, Enkemdem said to her, Look at the evening sun as it sets the sky ablaze with crimson hues. Anyamin looked up to the slightly stooped but towering figure of the old man. Enkemdem beckoned to Anyamin, directing her gaze to the descending dusk gradually enveloping the earth. Heavy with sorrow, her heart clouded her understanding of the old man's intentions. She failed to grasp that he was urging her to seek solace in the presence of her ancestors, rather than shunning them. The old man did not offer any further explanations. As they walked in reverent silence, the symphony of nature enveloped them, and the old man seemed to comprehend her plight. Listen to the voices in the wind, Enkemdem murmured, his words a gentle breeze through the trees. Listen to the voice of the water. Hear the crackling of the bushfires in the wind. Anyamin had the strange feeling that she heard her name whispered in the wind. Involuntarily, she strained her ears to the howling of the wind and the gentle sing-song babble of the nearby stream. She understood that the old man was asking her to discern, within their sounds, echoes of her ancestors. But all she could make out was the rushing of water between rocks and the flapping of leaves in the winds. Yet, old Enkemdem clearly heard the laughter of the ancestors reverberating in these sounds. Enkemdem could hear the ancestors telling him that there was a time when Anyamin could hear them. But she had shut them out after pastors told her that she was dealing in necromancy. In her desire to escape hellfire, Anyamin had stopped pouring libations on her grandmother's head. She had cut the link between her and the ancestors. They had left her to her own devices. But they were ready to embrace her if she would turn back and embrace them anew. As well, there was nothing they could do if she continued to see them as agents of the devil bent on leading her to a hell that did not even exist. Enkemdem knew that it was not by chance that he had had the strong urge to go the shrine that afternoon. The ancestors needed him to provide solace to a distressed soul. Enkemdem turned to Anyamin and laid a fatherly hand on her shoulder. She felt an inner calm that she had not felt for so many years. My daughter, the old man said lovingly, I can hear your grandmother. She says you are her successor. Is that correct? Yes, Anyamin answered, almost with a whisper. Enkemdem invited her once more. In the wind, hear the lamentations of the trees. It is the breath of our forefathers. Feel the vibrations of the earth under your feet. They are talking to you. You need to hear them by yourself. I am not going to interpret a message that you have the ability to hear directly with your own ears. A chill ran down Anyamin's spine. Just moments ago, she had contemplated getting rid of their ancestral heirlooms. and now she was being beckoned to partake in the wisdom of the ancestors. This time, she listened to the wind more intently. She remembered how she used to tune her ears to decipher the message from the wheezing of the wind through crevices. Gradually, her grandmother's voice sprouted out from the seeming cacophony, clear and familiar. But she soon snapped out of the meditation, terrified. The voice of her pastor rose up from her inner self and filled her ears. Necromancy! Necromancy! She could hear him rebuking her. She corked her ears with her fingers, forgetting that the voice came from within herself. Don't be like King Saul, who went seeking for the witch of Endor, even though prior to that he had done a good job chasing them out of the land. Anyamin was tense and horrified at what she had just done by rekindling her former ability to hear from the dead. She momentarily froze, envisioning herself engulfed in the sulphurous flames of hell for eternity. The old man, sensing her turmoil, gently took her hand, and she felt reassured. "The departed are not lost forever," proclaimed Enkemdem, his voice resolute. "They reside in the waning shadows and in the darkening dusk. They reside in the blood flowing in your veins now. You are your ancestors!" As the wind stirred the leaves above them, Anyamin felt a presence, a comforting embrace that transcended the physical realm. At that moment, she realized that her ancestors were with her, guiding her through her trials and tribulations. A sense of peace washed over her, knowing that her loved ones were not lost, but lingered in the shadows, watching over her with love and protection. "What should I do?" Anyamin implored Nkemdem with urgency in her voice. "Follow me," the old man assured her. Silently, she trailed behind him, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. Upon reaching the shrine, Nkemdem handed Anyamin a hoe that lay in a corner. Just a few years ago, women in need of a child would come here and clean this place. Then they would speak their heart's desires to the ancestors. Many women have been blessed with a child by doing this simple action. This was not new information to Anyamin. She was told that her mother had conceived her after cleaning a Fuandem shrine. "You will clean the shrine," old Nkemdem instructed Anyamin. "While you are at it, open your mouth and talk to the gods. Speak to God. Ask our ancestors to intercede for you. Remember to apologize to our ancestors for wanting to burn down your ancestral altars. Beseech them to brighten your forehead with good luck. It is not all lost, my daughter." Nkemdem left Anyamin alone in the shrine and went in search of herbs in the surrounding bushes. He came back just when she was finishing her entreaties to the ancestors. He asked Anyamin to come and stand by his side. Then he addressed the spirits of the land on behalf of Anyamin, imploring them to look with favors upon her and intercede for her that God would shower her with blessings. With newfound determination, Anyamin accompanied Nkemdem out of the shrine, her heart buoyed by the knowledge that she was never truly alone. In the flickering fire, in the weeping plant, and the groaning rock, she discerned the breath of her forefathers, a constant reminder of their eternal presence in the world around her. As she departed from the shrine that evening, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, Anyamin carried with her the comforting certainty that the departed were not lost, but lived on in every rustle of the leaves, every ripple of the water, and every whisper of the wind. But above all, she left the shrine at peace with her heritage and identity. She felt rejuvenated. The end. We have come to the end of this episode of stories from the Nwe Highlands of the southwest region of Cameroon. If you have come this far, please don't forget to engage with our content. Like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel if you have not already done so. Until next time, know thyself, embrace thyself, cherish thy heritage.